Okay, guys. Um, Lots of technical challenges today. I thought I had everything ironed out, and then it just didn't work. I think this will work now. The only downside will be that the format I have my presentations currently in, QuickTime, Keynote, isn't accessible to you. So I'm going to have to figure out a way how to transfer that into Google Slides, which I'll just do. But I thought I better get chapter 5 out first and quick. So there are a couple videos at the end of this presentation that you won't be able to access through this video, but I'll put them on the Google Class as a separate link so you can access those. They'll be down here and slide at the very end, these last two slides. Okay, let's just try and burn through here. I'm going to try to do a quick review of chapter 5. We've already talked about a lot of this stuff, so it should be review. While you are listening and watching this presentation, your best kind of practice would be to have your notes out in front of you. I've got them here on the right-hand side of my screen, and then I've got the presentation here taking up the majority of the screen so that you know what I'm looking at on both of those pages. So both in my notes and in my presentation, you're able to kind of follow along. And so we'll start off with just a quick review and go through these three phases of ancient or historical globalization. And if you're following along in the book, the notebook that is, then I'm in these first 4 pages. This should be a little bit familiar to you. We start by talking about the 3 phases of globalization. And in the first phase is these ancient trade routes. So remember, this is all your stuff you learned in grade 8, Silk Road, any of that kind of thing, sailing routes, and early contact between places like Asia, Middle East, Europe, and eventually the New World, or quote unquote New World. And so these 3 individuals are not necessarily the most important people in that history, but they are 3 that stand out. And so, if you're using them in an essay, you might want to have a couple little facts about each one of these 3. Chandragupta Maurya, and I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, he used military and religion to unify trading areas. So it's a pretty unique method for establishing routes and connections between various places. He would have been here in India, and he would have reached out, I'm sure, into China and into Persia. And then Genghis Khan, which is, of course, a Mongolian emperor, and he would have been up here in the Mongolian steppe region. He would have used trade routes primarily to link his huge empire, which would have stretched all the way here to Beijing. Here we are, all the way over to Baghdad, what is today Iraq. And then, of course, Christopher Columbus, he left from, he was born in a city over here, Genoa, and then he left from Europe to establish a route. He was trying to get to China. So you want to just make sure you're aware of some of those facts for your concluding essay. And then when we get to more specifics about the first stage, some of the very important things are the fact that numbering systems, we talked about the numbers you use in Math 10 and your math classes came from the Arabic regions here, and they were traded along this Silk Road. So when you have these kind of points, all sorts of goods, yes, are going to be traded, but lots of ideas are being traded as well. So you want to make sure you're remembering that ideas were some of the most important and earliest things that were traded along these ancient routes. Okay, so like this picture here of the numbering systems and how it might have evolved. Round 2 involved empires and exploration. So then we have, this is kind of where we pick up from Christopher Columbus, and he's sailing from Europe, and then we make all these contacts here, and these colonies then become empires. And I think it's important that you understand the difference between an empire and a country. So a country is located in one area. So first, say Italy. Italy can be a country. Well, let's use Spain. That's a better example. Spain is a good country, right? Spain is here in the middle of this map. And as soon as they started to get New Spain and along this coast of South America, as soon as they started establishing government and rule and taking over religion and language, they became an empire. So now this is an empire, and Britain had an empire, and France had an empire, and of course those impact us quite a bit here in North America. Um, in addition to cultural domination through religion and other things like that, like language, they also controlled the economy, and of course our good buddy diseases. No essay at the end of this unit will be complete without speaking about diseases. So if I were you, somewhere in this first page or two, you're going to write, I want to make sure you write something about diseases there. Moving into the second phase is where we have, get back to the right page. So I'm on this page here, page 3 of my notes now. And then the second phase ends with basically World War II is what we decided. And from World War II into the third stage, from then onward, is what we have as kind of this end of globalization that we're living in. And this diagram shows kind of the progression of all these different countries that were very influential early on, and then the emergence of a superpower country like the USSR and the American superpowers. They emerged after World War II, and now we have the emergence of another superpower, China. And of course, diseases, and no better time in our class to talk about diseases than now, as we're all kind of suffering from the effects of coronavirus. Okay, so I'm going to move on page 4 now in the notes. Let's talk about how some of these early globalization things impacted people. I'm going to kind of burn through this one really quickly because we've talked about it a lot. There's lots of inventions. Here up in the top left-hand corner, we've got the press. That was a big one to help spread ideas. Top right-hand corner, we've got that lateen stern sail. That was enabling ships to travel without consistent wind, and they could go further distances. And then with the compass here in the middle, they were able to leave the shores, basically. And we talked about how at one time you always had to return to the shore, and now they can navigate with maps. As soon as these things started happening, the economy started to really boost, and people started moving from villages here into cities. And obviously they didn't look like that right off the bat, but it's important to understand that. So in your notes on page 4, I would highlight some of those things that you just talked about, some inventions. We talk about many historians believe that a middle class was the emergence of evidence of this trend of turning into a more globalized world. And when we talked about that in class already, we talked about this idea that in a city or a town, you have to be able to have a craft or a trade. And I think the example we used was like Brody could make, I don't remember what we said Brody could make, chairs or something. I think we had Amber making like using wheat, and I think we had Sasha doing something as well. But all 3 of those people didn't do everything. Like they didn't have a farm, they didn't have cattle, they didn't have chickens. They may not have raised any food. They just went to their local market and purchased that food. And then they made their living by making chairs or shoes or something like that. And so really at this point in history, we see the emergence of crafts and trades, and that's an important aspect. One of the big consequences of this globalized world was the fact that we have now a mother country, which is a phrase you're going to hear a lot, and then we have colonies. So you're going to hear mother country quite a bit, and you're going to hear colonies quite a bit. And this is an important idea because the mother country and the colonies established what we call mercantilism. And mercantilism works because the mother country gets all the raw resources and then exports all of the finished goods. So, for example, they were taking all of these raw materials from the New World, then they would send them to England, for example, and then make the chairs, ship the chairs back to America, and it was a really unfair system. Okay, so mercantilism did not allow for freedom, and it did not allow for much ability for these colonies to represent themselves. On top of all of that, they were being taxed. So in this little paragraph here on your notes, I would put something about unfair trade, taxes, high prices. All of those are some of the negative effects of mercantilism. And the people in the colonies didn't like that. They were upset with how that they're being treated. And sorry, just a sec. I got a timer going here, and I want to make sure we're not too long. And out of that discontent came ideas like The Wealth of Nations from Adam Smith. And so Adam Smith came along, and he wrote this really important book called The Wealth of Nations. It was actually a series of 5 lectures that later were turned into a book. But the point is that he was one of the ones that came up with this ideas that led to economics. And this one sec here, guys. All right, never mind. Sorry, that's taking too long. I set that up before. But he had 3 main points. The first being that there should be individual self-interest, and that will benefit society. So if all of us are taking care of ourselves, if we're doing the most we can to take care of ourselves, everybody will benefit from that. He also believed in a division of labor. So instead of me making pins, so he used the pin factory as his kind of famous model. Instead of me making 1 pin, I'm in charge of smelting the iron ore. And then this next person is in charge of stringing it out into a string. And then the next person's in charge of cutting it. And then the next person's in charge of sharpening the needle. And so those pins really led to the factory system where your division of labor increases productivity and allows for things to be made cheaper and higher quality. And then the last of his kind of points is that government should keep their hands off. And they should really only be doing 3 things. They should protect our borders from invaders. They should enforce local civil laws. And then they should enhance public works. They should provide schools. They should provide fire departments, libraries, things like that. But other than that, leave business alone because business will take care of itself. There's some pros and cons to that. Definitely, it leads to lots of innovation, lots of productivity. But it tends to leave people in poverty in some areas. Other things like the environment aren't very well attended to in most capitalist societies. So there are pros and cons, okay? And it's important to note that. So on this page, I would list some of those pros and cons here, where you have things like lots of innovation, lots of productivity, high degree of independence. Those are all good things. Some of the bad things, lots of people are neglected. If you can't provide a skill, then you're just out of luck. Some of the environment concerns are neglected. So we take resources just because they're there, and we don't really care about what's going on. And of course, you have, with all that, the chance that people are being corrupt and doing shady things just to earn money. So that's all important. In these notes, you'll hear on this page 5, you've got a little bit of some examples through other places in the world like Japan and China. All right, moving on. Let's talk about how did the consequences of historical globalization affect people, and you cannot talk about that without talking about these 2 things, diseases and resources. So disease came all over the place. North Americans here on this page 7, you've got lots of people that are dying because of this globalized influence, people coming from other areas of the world bringing diseases. And then, of course, resources are being used up like no other. One of the other negatives of globalization is the rise of slavery. Of course, that led to the depopulation of many African countries and a whole generation, multiple generations of people living in bondage and slavery. I would make sure you're paying attention to some of these big words. Chattels, that's a big word. And people did respond to slavery in different ways, and some countries ended it sooner than others. In America, it took a little bit longer. France and Britain responded early to eliminate slavery, but I think it's important that you understand that slavery was a result of globalization because these colonies needed laborers, and people were of the belief that Africans were less than human, and we can go over there, we can sweep up a whole tribe or whatever, and put them on these ships like you see here in the slide, and ship them over to America. They sell them like their property, like livestock. Okay, and then moving along quick here. Some of the other things we need to talk about is you need to watch that video on the Grand Exchange from the John Green video. That explains a ton about this unit, or particularly this chapter. Industrialization, we talked a little bit about this, maybe not as much as we should have. And I'm in now over into page 10 of your notebook. So if you turn to page 10, you're going to see, or page 9 actually, beginning at the bottom of page 9, the Industrial Revolution started in England. They had the right population. They had labor there. They had some machinery that had been invented there that allowed them to do that. The power loom, the steam engine, the spinning jenny, those are all really important. I'd make a note of that. You're definitely going to have to know about those in order to speak intelligently on an essay. One of the side effects of this industrialized world now is that we have huge factories polluting the environment, using up resources, and places like England can gain a lot of power. On page 10, you see some diagrams there. 2/3 of the world's coal was coming from England. Britain. Half of the world's iron was coming from Britain, and half of the world's cotton was coming from Britain. And that is going to change over time, but it's, early on, that was a big, powerful thing that Britain had going for it, as they were producing all these materials because of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, one kind of modern example, which is kind of fun, is these two chairs. So on the left here you see a chair, which is a Sam Maloof, Maloof. Maloof is his name. He was a chair designer and furniture designer, a wood craftsman, and he makes he's dead now, but for many years up until the 90s, he made handmade furniture. And now an original Sam Maloof rocking chair, like the one you see right here, costs, I put a bid in for one just to see how much it would cost. They came back to me and they said that this chair right here costs $23,000. $23,000. And over here on the right, you have the highest selling chair that IKEA makes. And this is a rocker that's pretty comfortable. I've sat in one before. And the reason I bring up these two things is because you have two different models of production here. And so in your notebook, somewhere here, this is the end of chapter 5. So somewhere on this, you might want to put Sam Maloof versus IKEA down here somewhere, because they represent a good polar opposites. On this side over here, the Sam Maloof chair, you have very high personalization. So this is a handcrafted, very high quality chair. And then over here, with the IKEA chair, you have really high quantity. So you can make tons of these chairs. They can be made cheaply. Both chairs make their company money. The Sam Maloof company makes a lot of money from their chairs. IKEA makes a lot of money from their chairs. But they come about that money in vastly different ways. This is the video I was hoping to show you. And it basically just takes you through the warehouse system of production of a IKEA chair. And maybe I can play a little bit of it. But you don't have the sound. I'll link this into the video so you can watch that. It's not long. And then here is another video about Sam Maloof. making his chair. And whereas before you had this big warehouse, as you'll see here in this video, if it'll play for just a second. There's Sam Maloof, that's the guy, and he's making that chair. So you have two vastly different forms of production. Both are very profitable, but they represent the difference between this idea of handcrafted versus industrial revolution model. Okay, so that's chapter 5 in review. You should be reading through the notes. Those textbook pages are there. And the next video I'll have out will be on chapter 6. Please email me if you have any questions. Get working on those writing assignments that I've given you, and you can be doing your entries. I had somebody email me a question about whether or not you have to write about the day of the news article. So like today is the 25th. Do I have to watch the 25th and write about the 25th? I think that's the easiest way to do it so that you don't get confused onto which day. I just need 4 entries in the week, okay? 4 entries in the week. So you just got to make sure you get those 4 entries done, and you'll be fine for those 20 points. And like I said in my earlier video, we sure miss having you guys in the school. Don't forget to email me. Have an awesome day. See you later.